You've been moving toward this stage for years, maybe even decades. Retirement, the point you were told would bring freedom, calm, and peace of mind. But now that it's getting closer, something feels different from what you imagined, and it's difficult to ignore. It isn't panic, and it's not fear in the obvious sense. It's a quiet pressure, a collection of questions that never fully disappear. Will it truly be enough? Did I prepare correctly? What happens if life changes after the paychecks stop coming? And those questions matter more than most people admit. Because you did what you were told to do. You worked hard, you saved consistently, you stayed disciplined, you followed the plan exactly as it was presented to you. So why does uncertainty still remain as you approach the moment when everything is supposed to come together? That's the part few people speak about. Because answering it requires looking beyond numbers. It requires asking whether the plan itself was ever truly understood or simply followed without being questioned. And for many people, it was followed year after year, step by step, without ever stopping to ask whether it actually led to lasting security. And now, standing near the stage where everything should feel settled, a realization slowly begins to form. Something may be missing. Not everything, but enough to matter. Because retirement is not simply about reaching a number. It's about what that number is capable of doing once you begin depending on it, how it performs over time, how it responds when life refuses to follow a perfect script. And this is where everything changes. Because the moment you stop earning and begin relying on what you've built, your entire situation shifts. The margin for error becomes smaller. The consequences of each decision become larger. Mistakes no longer cost only money, they cost time that cannot easily be regained. That is why this phase requires a different kind of thinking. Not the same mindset that brought you here, but one that protects, manages, and positions what you have in a way that can endure. And most people never make that adjustment. They continue thinking the same way they always have, whom the system will continue to hold. They believe everything will work out because it always has before. And slowly, small cracks begin to appear. Not immediately, but gradually, because what worked during your earning years does not always work the same way once active income disappears. The rules change, yet almost no one clearly explains how. So people continue with what feels familiar, and familiarity can be not because it is completely wrong, but because it may not be enough. There are small choices at this stage that seem unimportant in the moment. Minor adjustments, technical details that feel easy to overlook. But over time, those details begin shaping the outcome, quietly and consistently, until the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Because the difference between those who feel secure in retirement and those who don't is rarely effort. It's awareness. It's whether they recognized what needed to change and acted before it became urgent. And this is the part that matters most. This stage is not fixed. The outcome has not already been decided, because the way you think, the way you adjust, the way you respond to what lies ahead can still change everything. The direction remains within your control, even now, but only if you pay attention. Only if you are willing to look closely at what has been assumed, what has been ignored, and what must be understood before it becomes urgent. Because once you reach a certain point, reacting becomes more difficult, planning becomes more important, and awareness becomes essential. What you are about to hear is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to sharpen your thinking, to reveal what most people overlook at this stage, and to show what becomes possible once you finally see it clearly. Because retirement is not simply an ending, it is a transition. And how you move through that transition will determine whether the years ahead feel stable or uncertain. So don't treat this as background noise. Treat it as a moment to reflect, to reassess, to recognize where you are and where you may be heading if nothing changes. Because once you see things clearly, you are left with a choice. Continue on the same path or adjust now and completely change the outcome. There comes a stage in a man's life when the nature of his financial position changes in a way that is rarely spoken about, yet deeply experienced. It does not arrive suddenly, nor does it announce itself with urgency. It emerges quietly, almost unnoticed, as the years of earning slowly begin to give way to years of reliance. And within this shift exists one of the most significant transitions a man will ever face. For many years, his efforts are directed toward accumulation. He works, he earns, and he builds. His actions focus on increasing what he has. He works, he earns, and he builds. His actions focus on increasing what he has, strengthening his position, and preparing for the future ahead. There is movement, there is growth, and there is a feeling that progress is being made through continued effort. During this stage, the flow of income creates both security and flexibility. Mistakes, while undesirable, can often be corrected. Adjustments can still be made. Time, combined with effort, allows recovery and improvement. The system appears forgiving, and the road ahead feels clear. Yet as retirement approaches, something changes. The flow that once supported growth begins to slow, and eventually it stops. What was once being built must now begin to sustain. What was once expanding must now endure. And this transition from accumulation to dependence changes everything. It is not always understood in its full weight. For many people, reaching retirement is viewed as the completion of a plan, a destination, a moment when years of effort finally give way to rest and security. The assumption becomes that once a certain level has been reached, the future will take care of itself. But that assumption is rarely examined closely. The truth is that reaching a number is not the same as understanding what that number must accomplish. It is not enough to arrive. One must understand how to remain. This is where uncertainty begins to emerge, not as panic, but as awareness. A man may begin asking himself questions he never considered before. Whether what he has built will truly hold, whether it will respond the way he expects, whether it will last for as long as it needs to. These questions do not come from weakness. They come from recognition that conditions have changed, that what once worked may no longer function the same way, that the margin for error is no longer what it used to be. There are many who reach this stage the same way, that the margin for error is no longer what it used to be. There are many who reach this stage believing they did everything correctly. They followed the plan. They stayed consistent. They avoided unnecessary risks. And by doing so, they arrived at the point they were told would bring certainty. Yet instead of certainty, they feel something else. A quiet tension. Not because they failed, but because they sense that something was never fully understood. This is not unusual. Because the system that guides a man to this point does not always teach him how to function within it once he arrives there. It prepares him to build, but not always to sustain. It emphasizes accumulation, but rarely explains continuation. And so many people find themselves entering a stage for which they were not fully prepared, not in resources, but in understanding. There are examples of individuals who entered retirement with what appeared to be enough, yet still felt uncertain about how to manage it. They had built successfully, but had never fully learned how to direct what they had built once it became their primary source of support. In contrast, there are others who approach this transition differently. They recognized that this stage required a new way of thinking. They understood that the rules had changed and that their approach needed to change as well. These individuals often appear calm, steady, and in control, not because they possess more, but because they understand more. They do not rely on assumptions. They examine carefully. They do not continue blindly. They adapt. And through that adaptation, they position themselves in a way that allows their resources to support them effectively over time. Others begin to notice this difference. They see a man who is not uncertain but prepared, not reactive but intentional. There is a steadiness in his approach that comes not from luck but from clarity, and that clarity influences how he is perceived. He is viewed as someone who understands not only how to reach a strong position but also how to maintain it. There is an affirmation that strengthens this awareness. I understand not only how to build, but how to sustain and direct what I have built. This shifts the focus from arrival to continuation. It reinforces the idea that reaching a destination is only one part of the process. As this understanding deepens, the individual begins examining his action more carefully. He considers not only what he has, but what it can accomplish, how it must behave, and how it must respond over time. He recognizes that his role has changed. He is no longer simply a builder, he has now become a director. This shift in role requires a shift in thinking, because what worked in the past, effort, consistency, accumulation, must now be supported by something more: awareness, positioning, and deliberate control. There may be resistance to this realization. The mind prefers believing that what once worked will continue working, that no adjustment is necessary, that the system will continue holding because it always has before. Yet those beliefs must be examined carefully because they are rooted in conditions that no longer fully exist. The individual must ask himself whether his current understanding is truly enough for the stage he has entered, whether he is prepared not only to preserve what he has, but to manage it wisely. This questioning is not weakness, it is intelligence, because clarity comes through questioning and direction comes through clarity. As this process continues, a shift slowly begins to occur. The individual becomes more attentive, more deliberate, more aware of how each decision shapes what lies ahead. He no longer assumes that things will continue automatically. He makes sure they do. This change, though internal, becomes visible to others. They see a man who is not simply present within his circumstances, but actively engaged with them. He appears thoughtful, controlled, and prepared. His actions suggest that he understands the significance of this stage and is responding accordingly. This perception carries influence because those who demonstrate control during uncertain periods are often respected. They are seen as individuals guided not by chance, but by understanding. There is a deeper realization that eventually emerges from this process. Retirement is not an ending. It is a transition from one form of responsibility to another, from building to sustaining, from earning passively. He approaches it intentionally. He recognizes that what lies ahead will be not only by what he has, but by how he uses it. And in that realization, he begins taking control of a stage that most people simply enter, not blindly, but